The clinking of silverware should have felt ordinary, but that night it carried the weight of judgment. Around the dinner table, where warmth was meant to live, came the harsh command: give up the room or move out. In that instant, the only place you had ever called safe turned into proof of how invisible you'd become. While your sister's laughter filled the room with pride and praise, you sat in silence, carrying a truth your family had never cared to ask about. This isn't just about losing four walls, it's about finding the courage to step into the light after years in the shadows. If moments like this resonate with you, a gentle like and subscribe will keep us connected. The clinking of silverware echoed softly against porcelain plates, yet every sound seemed heavier that evening, as if the house itself carried the weight of judgment. You had spent years playing the quiet role, the one who prepared the table, who filled the gaps, who never demanded recognition. Around you, praise was always reserved for someone else. That night was no exception. The laughter, the beaming smiles, the proud glances all flowed toward your sister, while you sat with your hands folded neatly in your lap, invisible once again. And then came the words, sharp and cold: give up the room or move out. It wasn't just about four walls. It wasn't even about space. It was about erasing the last piece of home you had clung to, the sanctuary where you had built your life in silence. That room had witnessed your late-night study sessions, your endless spreadsheets, your quiet dreams that no one else believed in. To them, it was simply square footage that could be repurposed into a studio with better lighting. To you, it was proof that you existed. Losing it would mean surrendering everything they had refused to see. Memories flooded back: the sting of being 14 with a shoebox of crumpled diner tips hidden under your bed, the pride in saving $780 for a laptop. And then, the crushing moment when your father had taken it, insisting Madison needed video equipment for a project. You still remember the way your hands trembled as he walked away with the only evidence of your hard work, how your mother smiled sweetly and said, "This is for her future." That night you cried into your pillow, vowing never again to let your future depend on anyone else. Perhaps you didn't realize it then, but that broken promise became the seed of your independence. 13 years passed, yet the script never changed. Madison shone on every stage, real or virtual, while you faded into the background. At dinners, their questions for her were endless. How many new followers, how many sponsorships, how bright the future looked. And you? They never asked how your business was going, because they never believed there was one. They thought you were still job hunting, still chasing something uncertain. But in that very room they were now demanding, you had quietly built an empire. Finance books lined your shelves, contracts stacked on your desk, a glowing screen reflecting millions in investments you had managed with steady, deliberate care. Silence can be suffocating, but it can also be a shield. While they overlooked you, you learned patience. While they dismissed you, you learned resilience. While they poured resources into Madison's dream, you created your own foundation without the help. The irony was sharp. The room they wanted to transform into a stage for appearances was already the command center of a reality they refused to acknowledge. At the dinner table, when your father's fist struck the wood and the water glasses rattled, something inside you shifted. The old version of you might have begged or cried. But this time, you simply rose, calm and steady, offering no protest. They expected defeat, but what they saw was composure. And that composure came from knowing something they didn't. You no longer needed their approval to breathe. Upstairs, you sat in the quiet of your room, running your fingers along the worn desk, the books that had guided you, the lamp that had lit countless nights of unseen labor. You opened your laptop and scrolled through listings you had been saving for months. There it was, the house across the street. To your parents, it was just another property. To you, it was destiny. Buying it wasn't about square footage. It was about visibility. For years, you had lived unseen in the same home. Now, you imagined standing in your own doorway, directly in the line of sight, a daily reminder that you had always been more than they allowed themselves to believe. Every choice you had made led here. The weekend jobs in high school, the online courses in college, the consulting clients you nurtured quietly. Each late night and early morning built a financial strength that allowed you to even consider such a purchase. And as you studied the listing photos of that brick colonial, you realized the truth. This wasn't about revenge. This was about reclaiming yourself. You thought about all the times your mother called you adaptable, close quote, as if invisibility would avert you. You remember the casual threats, how your belongings might accidentally get thrown away during cleaning, how your space never really belonged to you. And in those moments, you understood that sometimes family isn't the place where you're protected. Sometimes, it's the place where you must fight hardest to be seen. That realization hurt, but it also freed you. You no longer needed to play the invisible child at their table. You had earned the right to create your own. And perhaps, if you are listening now, you know what that feels like too. Have you ever been told, in your own home, that you no longer belonged? Have you ever felt the sting of being erased by those who should have held you closest? If so, you'll understand why this story matters. because this isn't just about Alexandra. This is about anyone who has ever been overlooked, underestimated, or pushed aside. And if you have ever carried your worth quietly until the moment came to reveal it, then you are already part of this journey. If moments like this resonate with you, then staying with this story, or simply pressing a gentle like or subscribe, is more than support. It is a way of saying I see you, too. As you sat back that night, staring at the ceiling of the room they wanted to take, the decision crystallized. You would not fight with words. You would not plead. You would act. Quietly, steadily, deliberately, you would take every ounce of the life you had built and use it to step into the light. For once, they will have to look across the street and see you not as the adaptable child, not as the invisible sibling, but as the woman who chose freedom over permission. And that, perhaps, is where the true story begins. The following week moved like a storm cloud rolling slowly across the horizon, silent, steady, but impossible to ignore. Every step in the hallway, every glance across the dinner table, carried the weight of something inevitable. Your parents spoke with the confidence of people who believed the decision was already final. Your mother would smile sweetly and remind you of delivery dates for Madison's new equipment. Your father, sipping his morning coffee, muttered about children who don't understand sacrifice. And Madison herself. She wandered into your room without knocking, her voice careless, her eyes already claiming the space. One evening, you came upstairs to find your mother kneeling by your bookshelf with a garbage bag. In her hand were folders filled with the numbers, contracts, and plans that had taken you years to build. These old papers were gathering dust, close quote, she said lightly, as though tossing them away meant nothing. For her, they were just clutter. For you, they were the proof of your unseen journey, the foundation of everything you had created while they weren't watching. You crossed the room quickly, took the folders from her grasp, and placed them back on the shelf. She laughed softly, brushing off your seriousness. Oh, you and your paperwork. Madison needs this space to be pristine. You're always so adaptable, sweetheart. That word adaptable landed heavier than ever. To them, it meant you could always bend, always disappear, always make yourself smaller for someone else's dream. But inside, something solidified. You were not adaptable anymore. You were unshakable. At family dinner the next weekend, your mother's announcement sparkled with rehearsed pride. We have wonderful news, close quote, she told your aunts and uncles. Madison is about to sign with a major brand, and Alexandra is generously giving up her bedroom, so Madison can have a proper studio. The table buzzed with admiration, all directed at Madison and at your parents' supposed generosity. When the eyes turned to you, they expected a confirming nod, maybe a smile of support. And you gave them just that, lips curving into a polite line, glass raised as though in agreement. They had no idea that even as you smiled, you were quietly pulling away, like a tide preparing to leave the shore. Late that night, you sat alone at your desk, the glow of your laptop painting the walls. On one screen, Madison's exaggerated follower counts, projected growth she claimed would soon reach 50,000. On another screen, your own financial dashboard, numbers solid, revenue in the millions, employees depending on you. And in that contrast, you saw everything clearly. They had poured money, love, and belief into Madison's image, while dismissing your reality. Have you ever felt that contradiction in your own life, watched others celebrated for illusions, while your truth remained invisible? If so, you'll understand the quiet fire that burned in your chest that night. The confrontation came sooner than you expected. Madison walked into your room, a measuring tape dangling from her hand, her eyes bright with entitlement. Just getting the dimensions, close quote, she explained, stretching the tape along your walls. This space is barely adequate, but I'll make it work. My brand is on the verge of being worth $1 million, you know. I need this more than you do. It's not like you're doing anything important here. You didn't argue. You didn't shout. You simply saved your work, closed your laptop, and looked at her with calm certainty. Everyone has choices, close quote, you said softly. Some just take longer to make them. She frowned, confused, before rolling her eyes and leaving. She didn't know your choice had already been made. By then, the plan was set. You had contacted Marjorie, the realtor, weeks earlier. You had signed preliminary documents, transferred funds, and scheduled movers. Across the street, the brick colonial with high windows and a for sale sign stood waiting, as though it had been built for this very moment. In just a few days, you would no longer be the daughter squeezed into silence, you would be the neighbor who could not be ignored. But the nights leading up to that move were heavy. Doubt crept into your mind in whispers. Was this too much? Was it possible to draw boundaries without burning bridges? In the quiet of your room, you pulled out your old journals, pages filled with the same story over and over, achievements minimized, resources taken, love offered only when convenient. And in those pages, you found your answer. This wasn't about revenge. It was about visibility. It was about freedom. Wednesday morning arrived clear and bright. You stood in Marjorie's office, pen in hand, signing the final deed. Congratulations, close quote, she said softly, pressing the keys into your palm. The metal felt heavier than you expected, not just a key to a house, but to a life you had fought for in silence. By the afternoon, movers carried your books, your desk, your clothes into rooms with high ceilings and sunlight streaming through tall windows. From the master bedroom, you looked out and saw your parents' house directly across the street. For the first time, you felt not invisible but undeniable. Later, you returned to your old room, stripped bare except for a childhood teddy bear you left against the pillow. A silent farewell to the girl who had once lived in shadows. Walking out, you realized you weren't just leaving four walls behind. You were leaving years of being unseen, unheard, undervalued. And maybe that's the hardest part of any transformation, not the act of leaving, but the acceptance that you were never truly seen to begin with. Have you ever faced that moment when you realize the people closest to you might never understand your worth? If you have, you know the bittersweet mixture of grief and relief that comes with stepping away. As you closed the door one last time, you whispered to yourself, "This is not the end. This is the beginning." And across the street, the lights of your new home seemed to glow brighter, as though they already knew. Stories like this remind us that even when we are told to shrink, we can choose to expand. And if you've ever drawn strength from moments of quiet resilience, you know why these stories matter. A gentle like or subscribe isn't about numbers here, it's about carrying these truths forward together, reminding one another that silence does not mean absence. So let me ask you, if your family told you to give up the room you love most, would you have stayed and surrendered, or would you have turned that ultimatum into the doorway of your freedom? Sunday dinner arrived with the same rituals as always, the aroma of roast drifting through the air, the clinking of dishes, the rhythm of small talk that filled every pause. Yet beneath the familiar sounds, something electric hummed. You had rehearsed this moment in your mind 100 times, each version unfolding differently, but all leading to the same truth. Tonight, they would finally see you. You walked across the street, the folder tucked carefully under your arm, its weight both grounding and liberating. Through the window, you could already see them gathered around the kitchen table. Your father reading his newspaper, your mother fussing with serving spoons, Madison scrolling on her phone with her practiced air of superiority. The sight was so ordinary, yet tonight it felt like standing before a stage where the script was about to change forever. The door opened with your mother's familiar smile, the kind polished for guests. "Alexandra," close quote, she said, her tone surprised. At the table, you poured yourself coffee as though nothing were different, each motion deliberate. Madison raised her eyes briefly. "I've already picked the paint colors for the studio," close quote, she said sweetly, sliding samples across the table, blush pink, soft gold. Your father folded his newspaper with a crisp snap. "When are you moving your things?" Close quote, he asked, impatience already edging into his voice. This was the moment. "I already did," close quote, you said calmly, setting the folder on the table. The room stilled. Every eye turned toward you. Wednesday was my first night across the street. Confusion flickered first, then disbelief. Your mother's hand trembled, her coffee cup clinking against the saucer. "Staying with Chloe isn't a solution, Alexandra," close quote, she said quickly. "This is your home. You need to be rational." Your father gave a humorous laugh. "Rent is expensive. You'll be back when you realize you can't afford it." Madison leaned forward, her tone dripping with condescension. "Don't be dramatic just because you are jealous. Not everyone can handle my level of success." They spoke with the certainty of people convinced they already knew the ending. But this time, you had written a different script. Opening the folder, you slid the documents across the table with deliberate calm. "I'm not renting," close quote, you said softly. "I bought a house. That one." You turned toward the window, pointing at the brick colonial directly in the line of sight. For a heartbeat, silence stretched, almost physical. Your mother's cup slipped from her hand, spilling coffee across the white tablecloth. Your father's jaw clenched, his mouth opening and closing without words. Madison froze, her phone forgotten in her hand. And then, breaking the silence, Eli, the one sibling who had begun to see the truth, looked at you with wide eyes and asked, "How did you afford it?" Close quote. There was no accusation in his voice, only wonder. You straightened your shoulders. "I own a financial consulting firm," close quote, you said simply. The words hung in the air like a revelation. "We manage portfolios for clients across the country. Last quarter, revenue crossed 2.7 million. Your father's face reddened, his hand slamming against the table. "You've been lying to us about your job." But you met his anger with quiet strength. "No. You've been assuming. You never asked. You never wanted to know." Have you ever noticed how the truth, once spoken, can rearrange the entire atmosphere of a room? In that moment, you felt the power shift, the years of dismissal crumbling under the weight of undeniable fact. Your mother attempted to regain composure, her smile tight. "It's probably just a starter home, nothing too serious." You slid another page across the table, financial statements showing a 60% down payment, interest rates carefully secured. It's mine, close quote, you said simply. Madison's phone clattered onto her plate, her carefully constructed image cracking as reality confronted her illusions. The room became a storm of emotions: denial, anger, envy, confusion. But through it all, you remained still, steady, anchored by the truth you had carried alone for so long. And for the first time, you weren't invisible. Relatives began to hear the news. Neighbors slowed their walks to glance at movers carrying elegant furniture into your doorway. Whispers traveled quickly. Alexandra Pierce bought the Henderson property. Successful businesswoman. Self-made. Your parents couldn't control the narrative anymore, and that loss of control unsettled them more than your departure ever could. Your brother Eli, however, leaned closer, his voice low. Can I see your new place? Close quote. It wasn't just curiosity. It was allegiance. And in that small request, you felt something precious, the beginning of a bond no longer dictated by family favoritism, but by choice. Later, Chloe arrived with a potted plant and a smile wide with pride. Housewarming gift for the new homeowner, close quote, she announced cheerfully, setting it down on the table. The contrast was sharp. Her authentic joy beside your family's strained silence. And in that contrast, you understood something deeper. Sometimes the people we expect to celebrate us cannot. Sometimes their pride is too entangled in their own narratives. But support can come from those who saw us when no one else bothered. As you gathered your things to leave, your father cleared his throat. We should discuss your visits. Sunday dinners are a family tradition. You pause at the door, turning back with a quiet smile. I'm still family. I just live across the street now. That night, you stood at your window, gazing across at the house you had left behind. Lights flickered, voices rose, shadows moved across familiar walls. And yet, you felt no longing to return. Instead, you felt something new: peace, the kind that comes when you stop waiting for others to see your worth and decide to stand in it yourself. Perhaps you've lived a version of this moment, too. Maybe not a house across the street, but a decision that finally made you visible in a place where you had always been overlooked. If you had that chance, what would you do? Would you take it, even if it meant leaving behind the version of family you always wished existed? The days that followed your revelation unfolded like a slow tide, waves of disbelief, giving way to silence, silence giving way to whispers. In the neighborhood, your decision became the story everyone spoke about. Neighbors paused on sidewalks, murmuring about the young woman who had bought the Henderson property outright. Across the street, curtains twitched as your parents adjusted to the view of your new home standing tall before them, a daily reminder of the truth they had overlooked for years. Inside their house, the atmosphere shifted. Where once there had been certainty and control, now there was tension, sharp and unsteady. Your mother paced the kitchen more often, her phone pressed against her ear as she updated relatives who responded with cautious admiration for you. Your father retreated behind his newspaper, his pride wounded, his anger simmering but directionless. And Madison, her social media posts grew vague, peppered with complaints about toxic drama and unsupportive people, close quote, but the likes and comments dwindled. Her carefully curated image no longer glowed with the same intensity. Meanwhile, your own home began to fill with a different kind of light. Boxes were unpacked slowly, each item placed with care, not just as decoration, but as testimony. The desk that had once been squeezed into a corner now faced a broad bay window. The books that had been dismissed as clutter now lined shelves proudly. Each morning you brewed coffee in your own kitchen, stepping onto the porch to breathe in the air of freedom. The distance between your house and theirs was only a street, but it felt like crossing a border into a new life. Your brother Eli came often, slipping across with quiet steps, his eyes wide as he explored each room. This is incredible, close quote, he said one evening, running his hand along the polished wood of the banister. He asked questions about your work, about how you had built it, about the choices you made when no one else was watching. In his curiosity, you saw possibility, the chance to build a bond not defined by comparison, but by shared respect. For the first time, you felt like you weren't entirely alone within the family story. Your parents, however, struggled to reconcile the image they had held of you with the truth they now faced. One afternoon, your mother arrived with a pie, her hands fluttering nervously as she stepped into your home. We should talk, close quote, she said, her eyes scanning the spacious rooms, the tastefully arranged furniture. She insisted they had always believed in you, though her voice wavered under the weight of evidence that said otherwise. Later, your father tried too, his words blunt and cautious. We should put this behind us, close quote, he said on the sidewalk, his gaze flicking toward your house as though it were a rival. But trust, once fractured, does not mend with a single phrase. And Madison, her downfall came quietly, almost invisibly, like a thread unraveling from the hem of a dress. Brands began to question her numbers, sponsors hesitated, whispers spread about inflated followers. The glamorous facade cracked, leaving her frustrated and restless. Through your window, you sometimes caught glimpses of her pacing in the room that had once been yours, frustration etched into her movements. There was no satisfaction in watching her falter, only a quiet recognition of the truth. Appearances cannot sustain what is built on hollow ground. At night, as you stood by your window looking across at the house, you felt a mixture of emotions. Sadness, yes, for the family that had chosen blindness for so long. Relief for the distance that now protected you. Pride for the independence you had claimed. And something softer too, something like compassion, though you weren't ready to name it forgiveness. Perhaps time would decide. Your consulting firm continued to grow. Awards began to arrive, recognition from the community that saw what your family never had. You mentored young people who reminded you of yourself, bright, determined, overlooked. In their eyes, you saw echoes of your own journey, and in helping them, you found a sense of purpose deeper than success. One evening, as you signed paperwork for a scholarship fund in your office, you thought of the 14-year-old version of yourself, holding that shoebox of diner tips. What would she say if she could see you now? The answer came quietly. She would be proud. Family dinners did not disappear entirely. Sometimes you returned, sitting at the same table where the ultimatum had been spoken, but now you sat differently. Not as the child waiting for approval, but as someone who had created a life beyond their imagination. When Madison muttered barbed remarks about importance, you met her gaze calmly, no longer stung by comparison. When your parents tried to steer conversations toward their struggles, you listened politely, offering boundaries without apology. And though the old dynamics flickered like shadows, they could no longer trap you. Standing on your porch one evening, Eli beside you, you both watched the lights go out across the street. "It feels different now," close quote, he said quietly. And you nodded, knowing he was right. The house you once called home was no longer the center of your identity. It was simply part of your story, a chapter you had already turned. Have you ever experienced that moment, when the place that once defined you becomes only a memory? When the weight of years no longer binds you, and you can finally step forward lighter, freer? That is what has felt like, not triumph over them, but freedom for yourself. As months passed, your new home became filled with laughter and warmth, the kind that grows when people gather not out of obligation, but out of choice. Friends visited, colleagues admired, neighbors welcomed. And slowly, Eli's visits became more frequent, his trust in you deepening as he confided in his own dreams. In guiding him, you realized that breaking free wasn't just about leaving, it was also about creating a new pattern for those who would come after. The final confirmation of change came one quiet morning, as you watered the flowers on your porch. Across the street, movers loaded the last of your parents' belongings into a truck. The house had been sold, their debts too heavy to ignore. You stood silently, watching, not with gloating, but with a steady calm. They had made their choices, and now they faced their consequences. When the truck pulled away, leaving the house empty, you turned back to your own door. Inside, sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the framed awards on the wall, the books on the shelves, the documents on your desk. Everything around you spoke of a life you had built not because they believed in you, but because you believed in yourself. And perhaps that is the quietest, most powerful ending of all. Not revenge, not victory, but peace. So I ask you now, if you were in Alexandra's place, told to surrender your sanctuary and dismissed as though your dreams were meaningless, what would you have done? Would you have stayed silent, or would you have chosen to make yourself visible, even if it meant walking into a completely new life? As the months turned into seasons, the house across the street no longer felt like a boundary, it became a beacon. Every sunrise through its wide windows reminded you that dignity is not something granted, but something chosen. You had not only proven yourself to the family who once dismissed you, but more importantly, you had proven it to the person who mattered most. Yourself. The silence that used to weigh heavy on your chest had transformed into peace, the kind that comes when you no longer wait for others to recognize your worth. Life will always place us at tables where our voices are tested, where love feels conditional, and where choice